My name is Stephanie Mehta. I am the CEO and Chief Content Officer of Mansueto Ventures, which is the parent company of Fast Company. And I'm delighted to be hosting today's conversation. I think everyone who's here cares about the economy and cares about the future of work. And who better to help us understand what's going on in these two areas than Karen Kimbrough, who is the chief economist at LinkedIn, a company that has become synonymous with connecting human capital. Welcome, Karen.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
We have a lot of information to cover, but I want to start with your perspective on the overall outlook for the economy and labor markets. What are the numbers telling you and your team?
Yeah, sure. So right now what we're seeing is a pretty marked slowdown in hiring. We've got, I think in the last 11 months, we've seen continual slowing in employers hiring new employees. We can see that on our platform. And it's now, I think we're down to a 30% decline in hiring year over year. I would say this is not just a U.S. phenomenon. We see this around the globe. In some cases, other countries are down as much as 40% in the past year.
Wow.
In hiring. So, I mean, bear in mind that hiring was at probably an all-time high in 2021 and 2022. So we're coming off that peak. But it's a really marked slowdown nonetheless, and it is global, not just limited to the U.S. And it's also, varies across sectors.
Yeah, well, let's dig in a little bit on the tech sector since we're here at RSA. What are you seeing specifically around tech?
So tech in particular is hard hit, no surprise. We're seeing, when we look at technology, information, and even like the more modern media companies, we're seeing a 50% decline in hiring. So they've really pulled back the most. And in fact, when you think about how strong the labor market is, all of the softness is really just coming through the hiring. So, of course, there are some layoffs that we've seen in this sector. I would say the good news is that there are many other industries that are actually quite resilient. So there are industries that maybe are down a little bit, but only a tad. Think about healthcare and unfortunately, how much burnout there's been. They're still hiring nonstop for nurses, for doctors, for administrators. We see a lot of momentum in education. They're still hiring for teachers. Government is actually aggressively hiring. Unless it's counter-cyclical to the businesses slowing down, the government is leaning in with all of the Inflation Reduction Act investment. So we're seeing lots of pockets of resilience and then lots of pockets of slowdown as well. It's not clear from our mind right now that everything is slowing down massively. It's just some are slowing faster than others.
And so how does that tale of two sort of sets of experiences play into labor's leverage? Because some of your research is showing that even though we're seeing a softening in the labor markets, workers still feel like they have some power in this equation.
That's right. So think back 2 years ago, workers had a lot of power. They were definitely in the driver's seat, as I always said. They were able to kind of set the wage, set the terms and benefits of their employment. That is starting to rebalance. I would still say the workers hold a lot of cards, but we're seeing some rebalancing where employers have some say too. And of course, it depends by sector. But in general, a good example of this is we can look on our platform at LinkedIn and see how many open jobs there are, how many job postings employers are putting out there, and then say how many applicants are there. So a year ago, Stephanie, there were 2 job openings for every applicant on our platform. So lots of jobs. Employers were competing to get the candidate they wanted. Now it's the inverse. For every job out there, there are 2 applicants. So there's a little bit more competition amongst job seekers in certain industries for the job they want. And so we're starting to see that rebalancing happening. We're also starting to see a little bit of, I would say, job seekers realizing that the economy might be shifting. Some people talk about, are we heading for a recession? We can get into that if you want. And so we're starting to see worker confidence bottom out. In fact, worker confidence by our survey, which we do of somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 American members of ours, and we do have 200 million members on LinkedIn and in the U.S. Every 2 weeks, we ask them, how are you feeling about your ability to hold a job, your ability to keep your job? And that confidence bottomed out in February. So after 2 years of kind of rising generally, it started to decline and now it's hit rock bottom. So we're seeing less confidence We're seeing more applications per applicant. So when someone comes on our platform to apply, we've seen an increase by 35% in the number of applications they make. So there's a little bit more intentional job seeking, but I would just caution you not to look at this as if the labor market has totally shifted and workers don't have any leverage. There's a little more slack in the labor market, but workers definitely have leverage to get the job they want if their skills are matching it.
Right. And I want to come back to the workplace in just a moment. But since you opened the Pandora's box.
Fair enough.
Recession, yes or no?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
What are the data telling you?
You know, I think people always appreciate the fact that economists don't know any more than everyone else. But if you're going to ask me to be an economist, you deserve an opinion. So my opinion is yes, we're going to get one. We've had 500 basis points of tightening, more or less. We had a lot of financial conditions tightening, and we're going to have that recession later this year. But it will be mild. It will be short-lived. And it will be nothing like 2020's recession or 2008. So we should not have our hair on fire. Well, just a normal business cycle.
That's a relief. I mean, it is kind of amazing when you think about how long we've gone without a technical recession.
Yeah, I mean, and by the way, I know that's not what you meant, but also in tech. Tech has had a really nice run. We're starting to see some softening, but it's not the end of the world. That's business cycles. So yeah, it's been a while. Things have been great. We've had a pandemic push.
Right.
Lots of consumer demand, lots of money in consumers' pockets. And we saw businesses respond by hiring and maybe overhiring in some sectors. And now maybe there's some rebalancing happening.
Right.
Now,
so on the topic of rebalancing and what the world of work looks like post-pandemic, we talk about how the pandemic changed everything. What do you see as permanent changes to the way we work as a result of this 3-year period that we're still kind of coming out of?
Absolutely. So I think a lot about that because one thing our data do let us do is see a lot of the trends that are emerging across what is basically nearly 900 million members worldwide. And the one thing that emerged very quickly is how much everybody loves flexibility. And lately, or in the past, flexibility looked like remote. And people really liked it. So here's an example. At a certain point on our platform, we had as much as 20% of all of our jobs were remote jobs. And what we saw from that was an increase in applications by women in particular. Women were suddenly much more likely to apply to remote roles than men. We saw Black women and Latina women even more likely to apply. And I think that had a lot to do with the attraction that flexibility offered for them to manage all the obligations they have in the office and outside of it. What we see now is that employers are pulling back on the availability of remote jobs. So we went from, say, 20% of our jobs on our platform being remote to now it's closer to 10%.
And that's worldwide or in the U.S.?
That is worldwide. The U.S. always has a little bit more because for lots of interesting reasons about the U.S., people like to move around and live in one place and work in another. We're more open to that than anywhere else. But what we see as employers are scaling back on availability of remote jobs is that job seekers still love remote. Nobody wants to commute. Nobody wants to spend 5 days in the office. When a job seeker comes on our platform, 2/3 of them apply to at least one remote role. 50% of all the applications on our platform go to remote. Now remember, remote's only 10% of the jobs, but it gets 50% of the applications. So it is incredibly attractive. What I think is happening now, what we're seeing now is that that's starting to decline, the availability, but job seekers still like it. What's surging is hybrid, obviously. That 3 days in the office type role is surging in terms of what employers are offering. They're still putting out there those full-time 5 days a week in the office jobs, but those are only really resonating in certain industries. So think accommodation, where if you work at a hotel, you need to be there. Think about construction. Think about, obviously, things like military. You have to be there if you're going to work there. But many other industries, like professional services, finance, they continue to kind of be most popular for hybrid. So increase in hybrid. So I answered one part of your question, which is flexibility is here to stay. Even if remote isn't here to stay. Flexibility is. People got used to it. They like it. They're not going back. So we got to find different ways of offering that flexibility. It could be hours of the day. It could be locations, days of the week, terms of your job. So that's one thing that I think is kind of the future. The second thing I think, and I'll wrap it up quick, but I really want to go into this if you don't mind. The second thing I think is we're looking for in the future of work is we're seeing a lot more autonomy. So people wanting to take charge of their career. What I mean by that is they are job stacking. They may have more than one job. You see a lot of people who have 2 jobs. Even people who work in places like the companies that we're surrounded by may have a side gig where they're a real estate agent on the weekend. I'm not kidding. That is happening. People doing a lot more gig work, short-time work and part-time work stacked together to create an income stream. So all of that autonomy means people are taking charge of their careers. It's not a paternalistic, I joined a company, I'm staying there for 20 years. It's like, I might be here 3 years, get what I can get, and then I'm going to move on, or I might have 2 jobs. So a lot more autonomy in how you manage your career. And what that means is that people are starting to do lifelong learning. They're starting to invest in their skills and their learning because they know that they need those skills to stay competitive. You know, we talked about whether employers are competing against each other or job seekers. And if you have the skills that are in demand, you have a lot more currency to maneuver through the job market. You have a lot more currency to skip from one industry to the next. You have a lot more currency to be resilient against shocks. So we're seeing a lot more focus on investing and learning lifelong, as opposed to like, I learned what I learned in my MBA and then I never went back to school and learned anything again. That's over.
What impact will this shift to more skills-based hiring and skills-based applicants mean for the overall economy, and in particular for populations that are currently underrepresented in tech, finance?
Right. So let me take a minute to describe what I think skills-based hiring really is. It has been traditionally the case that when you put a job description out, you will say, I'm looking for someone who graduated from this school. I'm looking for someone who has this degree. I'm looking for someone who has worked in this role with this particular title. And those are all great signals for how do I find someone who's really competent in the things I want them to be able to do, the tasks, the skills. Skills-based hiring says, that's all great, but maybe if I just force myself to identify the actual skills I want someone who can lead a team that's dispersed globally. I want someone who knows how to do change management. I want someone who knows how to, manage a team of whatever skills they may have. Being specific about the skills you want is a way of saying that's skills-based hiring. And we're seeing employers increasingly turn to that. We now have, I think, just under 50% of all the hirers on our platform are using skills in their approach to hiring. And what that means is they can expand their talent pool. So if I'm not limiting myself to people who just went to the school I went to or got the degree I went to, but I'm saying, hey, anybody who can do the kinds of things I do is an eligible candidate, I can expand my talent pool sometimes by 10x, by 20x. And in particular, to answer your question, it means that I'm starting to pull in relatively more women, relatively more people who are underrepresented. And I'm also managing to pull in a lot more people who are young, for example, may not have had that job title, but can do that role or grow into it. So we really think skills-based hiring is a way to sort of expand your talent pool.
Yeah. That's great news for underserved, underrepresented populations. But there's also some not so great news in the data, particularly around the advancement of women. And I know this is a topic that you've researched, but also one that's important to you personally. What are you seeing among women, particularly in leadership?
Yeah, so we've been looking at this idea of that's why the data is so much fun at LinkedIn. You can really see how people progress in their career. We managed to look at how women progress towards leadership, and there's no surprise. Women kind of drop out by 10 percentage points every decade. So if you start out at 50-50 graduating from college, you 50% men, 50% women. 10 years later, it's 60% men, 40% women, and so forth, until you get to like 20% women, 80% men at the C-suite. And that is getting better slowly but surely. We were just chatting about that. What is a little disappointing is that we're seeing the progress slow, and we're also starting to see some of that roll back. and I don't know what explains it yet. I'm wondering if it has to do with the economic slowdown, the fact that women disappeared from the pipeline for a couple of years through the pandemic and they did disappear. We had women drop out by between 2 and 5 percentage points in our data. They just retreated from the workforce during the pandemic for obvious reasons. And they've come back, but they have a gap now, so there's fewer of them in the pipeline for that next role in leadership. So we're seeing this rollback in the last 3 to 4 months that we're trying to explain. We're also looking at women in STEM. We can see a lot about where women in STEM are going, where they're staying, where they're not staying. And I'll just give you one takeaway, which is that we're seeing a lot of women graduate with the degree and then they don't even make it out of college into a STEM role. They pivot out of it right away. So a big proportion of women in STEM who are missing, it's not because they haven't got the skills in undergrad, it's that they finished college, they went and did something different. So we're losing them really early on.
Yeah. I know that you're looking at the data and trying to diagnose the problem, but have you identified any solutions? I mean, we have a lot of leaders here, a lot of people who are hiring. How do we reverse this trend?
I appreciate the question. I think it's really important because we all want to have representative teams, right? It's way more profitable, it's more fun, it's more productive. I would say, focusing on the interview process, focusing on making people feel like they can see themselves in the company is a great start. The mentorship, the sponsorship, all the classic things we know work, they actually do work. I'm here to say it as a Black woman. I got mentored and sponsored by amazing men all through my career and women, and it helped. I think the other thing to do is just to be very intentional, and I hope that as the economy slows down, and it is slowing down, we don't lose sight of some of the goals that we set for ourselves. I hope they don't become just nice to haves. I hope they remain essentials, in terms of our focus on diversity and inclusion, even in a tougher economic environment.
Yeah. The other phenomenon that I'm sure everybody here at RSA is observing and probably seeing on the floor is the rise of AI. And you can't talk about the future of work without talking about, whether the robots are going to come for our jobs. What are you seeing, and what do you forecast around the role that AI will have on labor markets?
So I think we're at a moment where we're not going to go back. This is huge, what we're experiencing. I think this is on par with technological change that we've seen in the past in terms of things like electrification of a grid or the internet. I mean, this is a huge moment. I think AI is going to permeate every aspect of business, and I can see it already in our data. The fastest growing skills on our platform that are AI skills are all generative AI. The 5 fastest growing skills last year were all generative AI skills. And this was a first. This wasn't the case a year back or 2 years back. So this happened very suddenly, but I think it's here to stay. We also see I think it's a doubling in the number of roles looking for skills in generative AI. For example, like large language models, computer vision, all these things. And we're seeing, I think it's like a 2 times or 3 times increase in discussion around Gen AI just on our platform in terms of people commenting and looking for roles. And so there's a lot of buzz. It might feel like a hype moment, but I think it's here to stay. I think it's huge and going to be massively transformational. And if I could just a minute put my econ hat on, not my LinkedIn hat on, but my econ hat on. Often when you see these big transformational changes in technology, you worry about how is it going to disrupt people. And in the past, it's usually disrupted what you would call the most low-skilled folks. What's different about this one is it's very likely to disrupt jobs in the middle skill tier. And I think it's one of those ones where usually what happens is people get disrupted, don't successfully upskill. They often end up downskilling or taking a role and competing with people even less skilled than themselves. So it would be really nice if we take this moment, which is going to happen out over a decade, by the way. It's not going to be tomorrow. And find a way to make sure we bring people along so they can upskill and really see AI as a complement, as a co-pilot for them, and not as a competitor for their job.
Are you already starting to implement AI in any capacity in your department at LinkedIn?
We absolutely do. I sit in the inch department, and they're busy on that as we speak.
What do you see as the ways that you might potentially use AI?
Look, I think a lot of the machine learning and artificial intelligence programs now are so powerful at summarizing and collating data in a way that saves you a lot of time. And as the mother of a student who's already been playing around with ChatGPT at school, yeah, we got to talk about that. It is effective at getting you a good starting point where you can pull a lot of information together. So, I mean, I've been playing around with ChatGPT, and I'm amazed at what it can do in terms of just combining large sets of information that would take me hours to kind of comb through in a way that gives me a starting place to find my own expertise. And that's why I kind of see it as a very powerful co-pilot tool, a tool that complement me and save me some time. And I can still go in and say, well, that part doesn't make sense, but that part I want to run with. So I use it all the time, even in just looking through all the papers that are out there.
That's really interesting.
Yep.
Yeah, and I love the analogy of a co-pilot as opposed to the master.
As a substitute or a master. And that's why autonomy in the workplace is so important. People don't want to work for a machine. They want to work for a human. And can I hijack us for 1 second? Yeah. So one of the things that we see are what skills are most in demand. And the robots are not coming for our jobs as long as you keep your human skills. If you're a great leader, if you're empathetic, if you can have tough conversations, you communicate effectively, negotiate well. Those are some of the most highly sought after skills across the platform in LinkedIn. And we have like 14, 15 million jobs on there. So having those skills are, they keep you competitive.
Yeah. No, that's great advice. Karen, earlier you said that one of the great things about LinkedIn is all the data. What's your favorite piece of data that or metric that you're able to pull together as a result of, the stuff that only LinkedIn has?
So I'm going to give you two answers very briefly. We have a metric, the hiring rate. I talked about how hiring has been slowing, and I think it's a great just barometer for where the economy is going. Like I saw hiring take off in 2021, and I said, oh, that's very interesting. So it's a great aggregate barometer of the economy, and we can look at it globally. The other one I like is our labor market tightness. How much slack, how tight is the market? And because it gives me the supply side and the demand side all in one. So I can say, are employers kind of more competitive, or is it the job seekers? And so my hiring rate metric and my labor market tightness metric are two of my favorites.
Right. And if I were trying as a leader of an organization, trying to understand sort of future of work trends, what data would you suggest I look at?
Sure. So we actually share this data. It's not a secret. We have a monthly newsletter where we put this out by industry, by region. You can see what's happening in Australia, compare it to the UK. You can look at it by industry and say, well, what's happening in manufacturing versus retail versus construction versus tech? And we put this out in a newsletter called State of the Labor Market every month. State of Labor Market, type it into LinkedIn, you'll find it. We have a workforce confidence index, tells you how our members are feeling about their career prospects and their financial prospects, whether or not they like remote or not. We ask them fun questions like that every 2 weeks. So we have a workforce confidence index.
Right.
And then maybe last but not least, we've got a great editor on our LinkedIn news platform called George Anders, who puts out a lot of workforce reports, just real human interest about what's going on. And I read his article all the time.
George is great. I used to work with him at the Wall Street Journal. Yes. Yeah.
Not just like selling stuff. I'm telling them.
Yeah. No, he's awesome. Karen, to wrap up,
Sure.
LinkedIn, as I said at the beginning, has become sort of synonymous with connecting human capital and connecting employers and human capital. What's it like to work at LinkedIn?
As a nerdy economist, it's amazing to have the data. I love it. As a human, it's a wonderfully human, empathetic place that's focused on creating economic opportunity for every member of the global workforce. And we really mean it when we say it. So it's kind of do good and feel good and all in one place.
What would surprise people about LinkedIn?
Well, we didn't get into it, but I think what would surprise people is some of the generational differences that we're starting to see. So I didn't mention this, but we can see what's happening with baby boomers versus Gen Xers versus millennials and Gen Z. And one of the things that we're seeing is that increasingly with younger folks, I guess I can say that as a Gen X, we're seeing that values matter and that people are gravitating to companies where they feel their values align with the companies. And so that is starting to be a way that people come onto the platform and they can filter by like, hey, I'm really committed to sustainability. I'm really committed to, enabling people with disabilities, for example. How can I find companies that really support it, are just talking the talk? And so values matter. And it matters increasingly for younger generations. They really will vote for their feet. They want to work in a place that feels like it represents their values.
This was such a fascinating conversation. I think for me, the headline is be on the lookout for that recession. Karen Kimbrough says it's coming. But it's going to be soft and our hair should not be on fire. So Karen Kimbrough, LinkedIn Chief Economist, thank you so much. Thank you all for being here.
Really appreciate it. That's fun.